right? They don't care what it's made of. They just care that it works.
Jen, thank you very much for joining us on WhatCannaRadio. You, out of all the people that have been in the hemp industry, I mean, you kind of started the New York hemp industry originally. I think I originally met you, not in person, but via video chat when a group I joined called Shenango Links had you on via Skype and talked about hemp and everything. And then we actually ended up meeting when we got to do a tour of your fields and check out all the hemp that was growing and all that kind of stuff.
I remember that.
Yeah, it was an awesome time. And I mean, we've collaborated on a few different things and talked about many different things that are happening. And it's fascinating to see where we're at now.
Sure is.
It's fascinating to see where we're going to go forward and kind of how much, but also how much we've accomplished up to this point and how much we still need to accomplish to really make the hemp industries thrive here, not just in New York State, but throughout the United States. But for those that don't know you, could you tell a bit about yourself? How did you get into hemp? How are you at Morrisville?
Sure. So my name is Jen Gilbert Jenkins. I'm the ag science professor here at SUNY Morrisville, and I've been here for 5 years. I've just finished my 5th year here. Before this, my family and I lived just outside of Philadelphia, and I saw the opening to work here at Morrisville, and I jumped on it. And then I was here no more than maybe a month and a half before JD Farms approached our administration, who came to a bunch of the horticulture and ag professors and said, hey, there's talk of this legislation that might get passed. Are we interested in partnering on this? And I said, yes, please. So, we've been involved since before the legislation got passed, working with ag and markets and figuring out what are the logistics of how the pilot program would run, with how colleges and universities would be partnering with other farms, and alongside of us was JD Farms the whole way, and Dan and Mark are fabulous, and we continue to work together. And we just started by saying, will it grow? Right? We're going to do a nutrient study in year 1, and we're going to we tried to look at a whole bunch of different, they're an organic farm, and we didn't grow on campus in year 1. We only grew at their farm. We were going to look at just different, I think we did a poultry litter mix, a bedded swine manure mix. We're just looking at different manures as sources of nutrients. And what we really learned were things like, wow, hemp can't outcompete weeds, right? So we had a whole bunch of really fun lessons in year 1. And we've grown from then, right? So every year we've sort of expanded our reach. We've partnered with 10 other farms in the state. We, at some points, have grown upwards of 80 acres this year. For lots of reasons, we're shrinking our acreage. We're only doing about 30 acres this year, but that's just a pause, certainly not for long term. And that's where we are, right? I since day 1 have been completely disinterested in CBD. It's not, other people can be super interested in it. That's great. There's plenty of space for lots of us to get in on the game. I love hemp for grain and fiber. I think that's where we're going to get the majority of our traditional farms. So I am really focused on looking at how traditional farms can become a part of the hemp industry and not have it be just specialty little, this is where we're growing boutique CBD, right? And I think there are places for that too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's not where my expertise.
You want to go more industrial focused. You want to
I want to go more field crop focused, right? That's where my expertise is. That's what I know how to do. So that's where I work.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, no, it's fascinating to see, and you mentioned the whole CBD aspect. There's definitely, vast majority of people are in CBD or cannabinoids now. It was originally CBD, now we're starting to notice the other cannabinoids that are
all extracts, right? All plant extracts. There's so many interesting things to look into there, and that's a whole we could have armies worth of researchers. There's so many questions that we can ask. There's no lack of room for people to get involved.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting because it's in some ways it's the low-hanging fruit because like people know about marijuana and so they know about cannabinoids, although it's kind of also
Sure.
challenging because you have to re-educate people. But then also it's the high-hanging fruit, I guess is the term. I'm not really sure if that's ever used, but because we have the regulation issues
Sure.
and there's just so many things that come into play there, and many people don't really understand that. They just see I mean, now people are beginning to realize, oh, CBD is not going to make you a millionaire overnight, as we had many people looking at originally. I mean, I had people come out to my farm when I was growing in New Woodstock, and like they looked at the field and they were like, oh yeah, this is great. Like people that I would think of as like knowledgeable business people that understand numbers and understand projections and understand how much time and energy and resources takes to build something, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we can just plant this in our backyard, we can become a millionaire overnight, like people come buy it. And that's just not what we're seeing, right? I mean, like in terms of CBD particularly, we're seeing many, like for a processor, it costs the same amount of money for them to process X amount of biomass, no matter how much CBD content is in it. So they want to get the highest quality material, and so they go elsewhere for it if they can't find it in New York State, and that seems to have been the case in many places because the seed genetics is an issue. But in terms of fiber and grain, I definitely, it was my original passion targeting this. I did jump into a CBD business for a period of time, but I quickly got out of that due to bad business leadership. It was originally my focus because my parents came from scientific publishing and particularly material science publishing. And
Right.
so I was just like looking at, oh, this is so cool. We can take the fiber and we can make all these different materials out of it. Of course, it takes a little bit more than just simply taking the plant out of the field and making it into these different things. But it's, in terms of I think the longer term, like bringing fiber and, or even sometimes grain as well into like the more high tech industries is really going to what's going to drive this industry forward. In terms of like the long term gains, what it was really going to get into the main markets. Like certainly cannabinoids are going to be great medical places. They're going to be great maybe food products depending on what the FDA decides.
Mm-hmm.
But the aspects of fiber, like really, like yes, right now lots of people are selling hemp products to a hemp market, right? But really
Right.
what we should be doing is selling hemp products to a normal market. The vast majority of people have no idea what they're buying, really. They don't need to know they're buying a hemp product. They just need to know
Right.
it's better for them, it's better sustainably and all.
Or
So
they just need to know that the product works, right? They
yeah,
don't care what it's made of. They just care that it works. And so there's going to be that piece of the market that is more, it's like, that is like, oh, that says hemp on it. I'm interested in that, right? But then there's also going to be the piece of the market that if you just show them two products, this is a product made out of wood and a tree wood, right? And this is a product made out of hemp curd, and this one functions better, that might drive their goals. So
yeah,
I think that that's really where my focus is. I love our hemp community, but I really want to expand beyond that and not be so insular. Not that anyone else is, just saying like, I, for this crop to take off and to be grown the way that we grow all the rest of our crops, which is ubiquitous across field crop production, then there needs to be mass buy-in, and it can't be seen as the hippie crop.
absolutely. Yeah, we need to have scale. We need to have hundreds of thousands of acres versus tens of thousands of acres or thousands of acres, and we need to have it on a lot of hemp growing in one location, so we can have a processing plant in one location. Don't have to ship it hundreds of miles across country, basically lose all the money in that process.
Well, and
So
I
it's
think what's really important to note about that is that there's no such thing as a processing plant, right? So to get from farm gate to store shelf, there are many stages of processing for all of our products. There's no one-stop shop. And once it's gone through that first stage of processing to refine it down into the next stage raw material, then it really can be shipped further, right? It's that first stage of processing to break it down into the raw materials that needs to be close to farms.
yeah,
Once you're in that form, then you have the ability to ship much further. You have the ability to bulk more material. You're essentially increasing the bulk density. And so then you really don't need the entire supply chain in one place. You just need those first steps to
yeah.
be close to farms.
to break it down and have all the separate components, and then also get rid of all the waste material that's just extra weight that you don't want to be shipping around.
If that is waste material, right?
Yeah,
Because one
absolutely,
person's waste
absolutely.
is another person's gold.
Absolutely, and it's definitely with the hemp plant. I mean, all components of it, but particularly the fiber. It seems like we pretty much can use just about every single component of the plant, and that's really cool. I mean, from my standpoint, it seems like with many other crops, that's not necessarily the case, though. That it could be a very ignorant thing to say of me, as I'm not super familiar with all the other crops, but hemp seems to be able to have so many different applications. We can take the herd, we can make plastics or hempcrete or whatever we want to make out of ethanol, and then you can take the bast fiber and you can make composites, and you can make clothing and textiles and all that kind of stuff. And so there's just so many different ways that we can take, and even the roots potentially have benefits to us more on the wellness and medicinal side of things. And so I mean that has a lot. The wellness and medicinal has a lot more of a ways to go in terms of studies and everything before we're really at a point that we can be like, yeah, we know what this cannabinoid's going to do if we take it in this dosage and mix it with these other cannabinoids. But with fiber and everything, I mean, we definitely still have a ways to go in terms of R&D for like battery projects, like what Mark is working on, or for composites and such and plastics. We definitely have a little bit more of a ways to go, but at least it's a bit more familiar in terms of we can compare it to other crops that we have out there, other plants we have out there, other materials we have out there, and kind of apply that research to it. And so,
I think that, I mean, we have things like oats and rye and wheat that we harvest for grain, and then we go and harvest the straw, and there's a huge straw industry that, you know, that requires that. And so we're used to dual purpose crops. That's okay. The interesting thing with hemp is that you just get more biomass per acre, right? Because it's such a large crop.
Yeah, that's definitely.
We don't get 11-foot tall oats.
Yeah, it's definitely quite something to see in the field, growing that tall. I mean, even just the rate of growth too. I remember my first year of planting, I put seeds in the ground. It was I think it was really dry. I think it was 2017. It was a really dry year, and the plants grew like maybe 4 or 5 inches, and then they just stopped. And I was just so worried that my crops had died. But it was just a matter that they needed some water. Yeah, absolutely. And something that you've mentioned a lot before is the whole aspect of they're a lot more drought tolerant than they are being too soaked, and too soaked will definitely kill them off. But it's fascinating that so people like from the more recreational cannabis space told me that, oh, if you just wait until it rains, it'll grow like 3 inches every single time it rains. And I didn't believe them, but then it started raining and it just shot up, and like all of a sudden I have a crop. And it was just like, where did this come from? And so it's definitely it's fascinating to see that. But in terms of that, you've mentioned the whole aspect of it. It needs you don't want it to be too wet. But what are like parameters that you have to, when you look at it, like this is a good growing medium and this is not a good growing medium?
I mean, so for me, the growth medium is soil, period.
Yeah.
Right? Because I direct seed. And so I'm very interested in currently doing some studies looking at actually using the hemp fiber for growth medium. But, you know, when we look at things like our typical potting soils, things like ProMix that all of our large greenhouses use, right? The material has a certain bulk density and a certain particle size distribution. And that makes it so that it is both well aerated as well as holds on to water well enough. And because if the particles aren't small enough, then the water won't hold in the pores and it'll just drain out. And so really what you're looking for is a material that holds water like a sponge, so that there's no water dripping out of it that's too wet, but that it stays damp to the touch. And so it can provide the plant water consistently over the course of however many days you want to go without watering. You know, because in the field, we're doing dryland agriculture. You don't have large irrigation booms here in New York. A little bit if you go into Western New York, but not so much. And so we typically, in the Northeast in general, get an inch of rainfall a week throughout the entire year. That's our 30-year average, right? But in horticulture settings, right? When we're starting in the greenhouse, we have control over all that. And so you really just want to make sure that you have a medium that, like a sponge, when you pick it up, it feels damp, but not dripping.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's you mentioned it last time we spoke. It's called field capacity, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes,
So saturated is when the pores are totally filled with water, and field capacity is when there's water in the pores being held against the force of gravity.
Yeah.
So how much water can be held there? So sandy soil has a really low field capacity. So if your soil is too sandy, it dries out, and we see that sandy soils get very droughty. And so there's not a consistent amount of water being available to our crops. Whereas if you have a soil that's too clayey and has a really high field capacity, and sometimes for our crops, it's not drying down enough, right? You're not losing enough water. It's always keeping too much in those pores, which is why we like those loamy soils that are a perfect mixture and give you that a bit of dampness without too much over the course of that growing season. And so when you hear people tell you that hemp will grow anywhere and it's going to save our soils, we need to just say, okay, you're sweet, and move on, because that's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something I've seen.
It'll grow anywhere.
Yeah, but
it won't grow well anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I've noticed. And to some extent, there's truth to the myth, as there are to many myths, in that you can find a genetics or some seed that will grow in Canada, and you can find a different seed that will grow in Brazil, right?
Right.
But you still need good soil. You still need good soil.
Every plant, right? Yeah. Like tomatoes come from Mexico, and we grow them fine here. If you take a tomato plant that's growing in Mexico and transplant it to New York, it's gonna die, right? So that's true, the genetics of all plants, that over time they've adapted to the environment that they're in. And so it's not to say, and this is sort of the difference between hobbyists and farmers, right? A hobbyist is someone who's interested in the crop and has heard a lot about it, and maybe, has grown a couple of pot plants in their basement. They're not looking for maximized yield. A farmer is someone who's looking for maximized yield. And so that means that you don't want to know just that the crop will grow. You want to know that it's going to grow and yield well. And so that's a real difference. And I think that that's where a lot of the myth comes from, is that misunderstanding that, of course, it will grow. It just does. If I compare that to what's being grown in fertile, well-drained, and irrigated soil, you're going to look at the difference between maybe a plant that's 5 foot tall and a plant that's 9 foot tall. That might not make it a difference to you if you're just someone who's interested in the plant. Yeah. But if you're someone who's making money based on how much you yield, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely noticed that a lot, and especially, prior to this, of course, I grew up in farmland, so I've always known farmers. But prior to this, I didn't really know what farming was all about. And but one of the major things that I found out was that many farmers don't even make their money back each year, right? They're actually running at a loss. And so the whole idea of oh, I'm not certain that I'm going to be able to get my crop out of this, I'm actually going to be able to harvest it and then be able to sell it, that right there, the risk, it's not even the factor of am I willing to try this and am I willing to try the risk? It's just the factor that you can't, the risk can't even be accounted for, because it would just put them in the hole completely, and they wouldn't be able to climb out of it because they're already in a hole of some sort. And so there's a lot of challenges, and I agree with that. There's a lot of people that come to it and they're like, oh, I'm the hobbyist and I just want to grow a few plants and see what it's like and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's great, but there's only so much you can learn by reading, which I definitely learned once I put seed in the ground. There's a lot more to learn, but then also just by growing a few plants in your backyard, because also you're not going to get the same field density that you would have if you were planting it in the field with a grain drill or whatever you might be using. And you've talked about using broadcast planting and rolling as well. Yeah. But there's so many factors that come into play. And you've said it before in terms of hemp is a baby, right? It will
a whiny baby.
Yeah, it's a whiny baby, but when you put in the time and you put in the effort to grow it, then you're going to get an amazing crop on the other side, right?
Yeah, it's a whiny baby, but it's a really strong and vigorous preteen, right? Yeah. So once you get it through the baby stage, it's like, hey, thanks a lot for all the help, and now it pays back in dividends.
Absolutely.
It's funny though, like, in a roundtable I was on recently, I had said that it's really important to remember that hemp is just another crop, right? And that in terms of farm production, we need to figure out how to work this into our crop rotation. If we want industry to come to New York State, then it can't be just like, this is a hemp over here, people who are interested in hemp here, people who are interested in it. That's not going to happen. We need it to be a part of our crop rotation. And so we need to figure out, how does it fit in, and how do we make it palatable and interesting to the people who are currently doing, corn, beans, alfalfa rotations, right? Like, that's the majority of what we're doing. We're growing food for our dairy industry. And so it's interesting because I got a lot of blowback of like people like, it's a special crop. I'm like, no, it's not. It's just a crop. Yes, it's a plant that you can do tons and tons of things with. And once it's grown and harvested, it is special. Great. Yeah. Tell me all the wonderful things that you wanted to do to save the world. That's fine. But from an on-farm perspective, it is a crop just like any other crop. And we need to figure out ways to enhance the profitability of it so that our everyday farmer wants to be planting 100 acres a year, 300 acres a year, like they are with their corn, planting 1,000 acres a year, right? Like, so we want to make sure that we are not just appealing to the hemp enthusiasts. We want to make sure that the work that we're doing is proving across the board how this crop benefits New York State.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's definitely a good point you made in terms of like, it is just another crop, right? Yes, once you harvested and you've grown and everything and you got it to market, then you have lots of uses you can use for it. But that's actually something I realized when I was speaking with a member from the USDA. He was talking about like, yeah, all the people in the hemp industry and are enthusiasts about it, just like they see the specialties of it, right? And just like we were saying with the hemp only market, like there's a lot of people that are just trying to sell into the hemp only market, but really we need it to be looked at as just another crop if we wanted to get the same kind of infrastructure and recognition that other crops have gotten.
If we want the acreage to expand, then we need to figure out how to fit it into our current crop acreage, because that means that acres are being taken out of production for things that feed our dairy industry.
Yeah.
And so there has to be a darn good reason for that to happen. And I feel very strongly that there's no such thing as a hemp farmer, because no one can put it. So it's to me, because you have the group of people who are really hemp enthusiasts and are like, we want all things hemp, and then you tell them there's no such thing as a hemp farmer, and they're like, that's not true, right? Except they're the same people who are opposed to farmers planting continuous corn, because we hear about all of the environmental issues that come from monocultures. Well, hemp is no different, right? We don't want monocultures. My passion, right, what I am most interested in is soil health. I'm a soil scientist. I tell everyone, like, I'm a soil scientist. I play an agronomist on TV, right? Because my job is as an agronomist, but I'm a soil scientist. And so my passion is in soil health. And to me, the key to soil health is crop diversity. So that means, how do we fit all of our crops together? How do we get our farms that are maybe growing 2 or 3 crops to grow maybe 4 or 5 crops? Right? How do we increase the amount of plant diversity so we all the wonderful things that come from that? And so folks who are coming from outside of agriculture and are like jumping in and like, hey, we're going to farm hemp. Great. What else are you going to grow in the 3 years in between when you can grow hemp again? Right? And so I think that that's a really important, unless they just have a ton of land and are just going to keep moving and have land fallow for 3 years, sure, that's fine too. And then you can just be a hemp farmer. But that's a whole lot of land to keep fallow. So I think that it's really important for us to be able to think of this in a more sort of down-to-earth way of, this is an awesome crop. We can do amazing things with it. I think that the potential to disrupt the plastics industry is huge, and that's really fun and exciting, and I love positive things like that. But let's think of this in a realistic way. What are our real actionable things that we can do?
Absolutely. And that definitely seems to be something kind of across the board with hemp, is that we have this community behind it that is so gung-ho hemp. I mean, before I really got into the hemp industry, right after high school, I went backpacking on the West Coast. And initially I thought I was going to get into marijuana. And then I looked at like legally, what is the difference between hemp and marijuana? Because they're really just legal classifications, not two different things. But was that marijuana is basically THC and hemp is everything else. And I was like, wow, I can focus on all this other stuff. And then I began realizing, like, again, going back to the whole aspect that my parents were in material science publishing. So I kind of come from that background more than from like the medicinal background. But just realizing that I can talk to so many different people about this. I can talk to people in the construction industry. I can talk to people in the pharmaceutical industry. I can talk to people in the automotive industry, whatever it might be, or even farmers too. And it's just, but this kind of community behind it is really great because it can move it forward, and we need to change legislation and everything. Of course, like if you weren't growing corn, it's not like it's illegal not to grow corn. You could plant corn all you want, right? Whereas hemp is like, if you're not growing hemp, it's illegal for you to plant hemp. So it's kind of a different playing field. So like we definitely need that drive behind it, but then it almost steps too far in that I think, like, again, when I was getting into the hemp industry, I thought everything be made out of hemp. I was like, oh, I'm going to be 100% hemp. Like everything is going to be made out of hemp. My cars are going to be made out of hemp. My phone's going to be made out of hemp. Like everything's going to be made out of hemp. And I even like worked on like technology product, like research, primarily technology projects in terms of like, how could you make LEDs out of hemp, all this kind of stuff. But, and there's definitely a lot of things you can do, but we still need metals. We still need other materials. Like it's not like it's going to replace every single thing on your shelf, right? It's not going to replace the shelf necessarily. I mean, maybe
and you don't want it to. And what's interesting is that there are other bast fiber crops, and those other bast fiber crops can be close to as interesting as hemp when it comes to the fiber side of things, right? And so it doesn't have to be all hemp all the time, right? And I think that if we can look at we can say, how might that fit into, right? Does that help us break up some of the pest pressures that might be building, right? So I think it benefits us to have wide range, to have a wide view of what's going on, and then to narrow in on individual pieces, because if we think that hemp is going to save the world and there is nothing but hemp, I feel that the majority of the world population will say those are hemp crazy people and we're just going to ignore them, right? But if you can have a reasonable conversation about these are the things that actually it makes a lot of sense for us to start working on, and then from there expand out, right? And say, hey, how about we try doing this now? And oh, look, now that we're doing this, look at this byproduct. Why don't we try doing something with that, right? The opportunities are really endless, right? But it all starts with figuring out what are the products that make most sense in the state that you're in, right? Because we have hemp all over now. What are the products that makes most sense in the state that you're in? Because you hear that number, whatever it is, 25,000, 50,000, right? There are a lot of uses for the crop, right? But only if there's someone to process it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what a paper plant needs, and what an automotive technician needs, and here I'm just talking about fiber, right? I'm not even talking about all the different needs of the grain and the extracts industry, right? So what each of those people need is a different product, and so maybe a different initial process. So we really need to figure out which of these processes, which of these products can we build up within the state so that we can expand the industry in a measured way that it's not going to just crash.
Thank you very much for joining us here on WhatCannaRadio. If you enjoyed what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please consider smashing that like button below and subscribing to our channel so you can be the first to know when we release new content. If you enjoyed the video so much that you'd like to watch another right this moment, check out our video right here. Or if you'd like to see what YouTube is offering to you, check out the videos over here or down below. Thank you very much for joining us, and have yourselves a wonderful day.